Hello, everyone. My name is Paul Landfy, and this, of course, is the Property and Investor podcast. I am your host. And before we begin, as ever, I need to say a few words to you. Nothing in this podcast can be considered legal, health, or financial advice. Of course, do your due diligence, and nothing in this podcast constitutes any kind of endorsement. You know that this podcast is all about me interviewing, the most resilient, inspiring, interesting people in property investing and beyond. And this interview is going to be no exception to that, I can tell you. So my guest today is Ankie Bell. Ankie, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Paul. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's great to be here.
It's an absolute pleasure. So what we would typically give as an introduction to Ankie is that, and I will need some help with this, Ankie, because despite the research I have done, I'm still none the wiser what a SAP implementation consultant is. But we'll get to that in a minute. But so Ankie has had a very, very prolific corporate career working for some of the largest and well-known companies on the face of the planet. Not only has she done that, she's a mum of four. She's been investing in property for a very long time, and she's had this fantastic journey from a stable buy-to-let strategy to a wild empire. And we're going to learn a bit about that today. And the theme of the podcast is why bigger isn't better. Ankie, it's such a pleasure to have you here. Thanks for coming on the podcast. Are you well? Are you good?
Yes, I'm good, Paul. I'm good. Going back to basics in a lot of ways, which I'm sure we'll touch on loads more through the podcast today. But yeah, no, I'm really good. I'm going to South Africa in 2 weeks, which is always fantastic for me to go home. I'm going for a family wedding and a well-earned rest, so looking forward to that. But yeah, I'm just excited to be here and looking forward to speaking to you.
Well, obviously I'm envious that you're going to South Africa. I've got a couple of friends who are in property, you probably know them, who occasionally post these videos of them in South Africa looking out to sea and whales breaching in front of their house. And yes. I have to say, I find that deeply envious.
I know. I'm probably thinking of the person that you're talking about right now. And yeah, that property is pretty amazing. And I'm hoping to visit it soon when I go to SA. We're going more to a game farm and doing that kind of thing, more safari. And then we're in my hometown, which isn't really a touristy place, but that's where we're going for the wedding. So it's always nice to catch up with family. And we're hoping to get to the coast for a little bit as well, but not the coast where people watch whales, more on the south coast near Durban. So that's where we're hoping to go this time.
And we're going to find out about your hometown in a second, because I'm going to ask you to take us right back to the beginning and tell us your origin stories. Now, we're in Q4 of 2023, and what I like to do at this stage in every year as we return to kind of towards the end of the year is to focus more on people's origin stories. I think there's enormous value in understanding the journey that people have been on in their lives and indeed property, because there's so many lessons that we can reflect upon and take into our own lives. And Ankie, I mean, I'm going to be completely transparent about this. I saw you speak earlier this year, and I think within about 5 seconds of you walking off the stage, I tried to get to you and said, you have got to come on my podcast. And the reason for that is that what you shared in that talk, I think, and I'm going to disclose all of my vested interests here, are the themes and messages that everybody needs to hear in property and beyond, and that we do not hear enough. That we just do not hear enough. So it's with genuine pleasure that I've got you on the podcast. I'm so glad we managed to make this work. And so let's get into it. So let's start with, so obviously the origin story is the key, is the key today, and the lessons will follow from that. So take us back to the beginning. So where were you born? Like, tell us about this hometown. Tell us about who your parents were. Were they property moguls? And then bring us up to the beginning of your property journey, and then we'll progress through that, and then we'll move on to more recent events, of which there's many lessons that you're sharing, which is so fantastic. And then we'll finish off with kind of looking to the future, and obviously what the future looks like for you. If that sounds like a good structure, let's do that.
Yeah, that sounds great. So I was born on a farm just outside a town called Vereniging, which is in the old Val Triangle. It's now southern Gauteng in South Africa. So I come from a family of farmers predominantly. My mum and dad actually met when they lived on neighboring farms when they were 7 years old. And my dad had 4 sisters, my mum had 4 brothers. So my dad became friends with my mum's brothers, and my mum became friends with my dad's sisters. So they've known each other since they were 7 years old. And most of those brothers and sisters, my aunties and uncles, all also then went into farming. So my parents were farmers, but my dad was a mechanical engineer actually by trade and by how he was educated. So when I was 3 years old, my dad got an opportunity to work at the technical university in our neighboring town. So we moved to the town where I grew up in, then called Vanderbijl Park. It is a town that is known for and established because of its steelwork. So it's not, like I said earlier, it's not a place that you'd go and visit as a tourist, really. It's quite an industrialized area. But my dad went to work there as a lecturer in the mechanical engineering department at this technical university. I am the youngest of 5 daughters, so I have 4 older sisters. And that is quite an important thing to know within the context of my home life and my family growing up, is my sisters all were prolific sportswomen, so they played netball at national level. My sister held the high jump record for our regional schools for most of her high school career, and 5 years after she left, that record was still there, you know. My other sisters were debating and Toastmasters competitors, and then choir and singing. So I come from a family of high expectation in terms of being valedictorians and head girl and those kinds of things. So being the youngest one, I entered into this environment in high school of being told, you are a Divenage, which was my last name. So therefore, you need to be able to do these things. So I was pushed into all these different sports that weren't my thing, pushed into different activities because I had to do them, because my older sisters did them really well. I found my own path with choir, with Toastmasters, debating, and with hockey. I rebelled against netball. I wouldn't play netball because all my sisters did, so it was hockey for me. But it was very much high performance environment in our schools, in our family, also partly in our culture. It's very much like you've got to do the best, you've got to be the best, you know. And I felt the pressure of that from a very, very young age. And I also felt the acceptance that came with high performance and with achievement. That acceptance then came as a result of that. That was how my brain ended up wiring. So I went to university in South Africa, to a uni called Northwest University, did a degree, and I was then headhunted by a company who were training up postgraduates in Pretoria. I moved to Pretoria. They were training up postgraduates in this computer system called SAP. And SAP is an integrated computer system that is used by many, many corporates across the world. It costs millions to implement, but it runs companies. So I was trained up as an implementation consultant. And as a result of that, got fantastic opportunities. I went to work in the States. I went to work in Australia. I came to work in the UK. I went to work in Holland. And then I ended up back in the States, where I met my husband, Jamie, who was actually a Brit. He's from North Nottinghamshire, but he was working for Shell in Houston, in Texas at the time. And I was with Royal Dutch Shell in The Hague, but they sent me to Texas to do a project there. And Jamie and I met. We started going out and then decided to move to England when we got married, so that when we had a family, we didn't have to travel 2 long-haul flights to get to Joburg. That was my big thing. When I had kids, I did not want to have to do 2 long-haul flights to get back home, because I was on many of those long-haul flights with those screaming babies, and I felt so sorry for those mums. So I was not going to do that to myself or my child. So we both transferred with Shell from the States to Shell London, and we were put on the same project. So basically, I was the implementation consultant for a specific area of SAP. My husband was the developer and the programmer who actually made the code work for those processes that I was implementing. So we were on the same team. We were living in England, but traveling to Amsterdam to work in The Hague every week on a project and coming home. And we soon realized this was not very good for our relationship to travel together, work together on the same team, on the same project. So I left then and started a different job in London, and worked then for the NEC Corporation just when they were bringing plasma screens out. We worked there on that implementation of SAP. I then moved on to work for EMI Music, who were implementing SAP as well. And then my last stint with on an SAP project was with Philips in Eindhoven, when we went over to Holland again for one last year before our kids started school. So in between that time, in 2002 and 2004, I had our first two boys. Mm-hmm. And we were both living in London, working in London, traveling an hour and a half each way every day to get to work. The kids were in nursery from 7 in the morning till 7 at night. It was awful. So we decided in 2006 that we needed to change something about our lives. And I then found property as a potential way of working around the kids so that we wouldn't need to employ a childminder to pick them up and drop them off every day because we were in London working. But we also wanted to get out of the rat race. We wanted to get out of the fast-paced living in London. Mm-hmm. And as I mentioned, my husband is from North Nottinghamshire. So we decided to move up here because then only one of us needed to work, for cost of living being so much cheaper up here. And I could then pursue property. So that was what we did. In 2006, I went on a property course with a provider who no longer exists. Really very, very cutthroat, stressful environment in that training room. You know, when you go on one of those free training days and at the end of the day, they all but lock the doors and tell you that if you don't buy their mentorship and their course on a credit card, you're going to be a failure. I was one of the mugs who fell for that spiel. I'm quite gullible in a lot of ways. So I did pay for this training that day. And it was a different time, 2006, Paul, you know, it was before the crash. You could self-certify for buy-to-let mortgages. You could get 90% loan to value, sometimes even 100. Sometimes they'd even lend you 110%. Remember, like they'd even lend you the refurb money, and it was just crazy. So that was when we started buying property. Our focus area was in Glasgow, where there were some real hotspots developing outside of Glasgow. So we bought flats for like 35, 40,000 K and put a 10,000 refurb on them and then sold them for 70, 75, sometimes nearly 80K. So that was how I started in property, was doing these flips of these old sandstone tenement flats in Glasgow, and then built up a fund from doing those flips, and then started investing in buy-to-lets. And we'd acquired a few. We had 4. After the flips we done, we had 4 that we were holding on to when the market crashed in 08, 09. And we got cold feet. We were so inexperienced. We were so risk averse that, you know, we just thought, no, we just keep what we have. They were luckily cash flowing well, so we kept those 4. But we got cold feet. I did some other businesses. And then in 2014, we decided to have a foray into property again and just started buying some buy-to-lets in our local area in North Nottinghamshire and South Yorkshire. And that was what we were doing from 2014 till 2017, built up a decent portfolio by that time. And then in 2017, in the meantime, I'd had 2 more kids. So in 2010 and 2012, just to mention number 3 and 4 that came along in between everything. So between 2012 and 2010 and 2012, I then had Jack and Lara. So we then had the 4. And in 2014, started again with property, as I say. 2017, then I wanted to do bigger things. I wanted to learn more. So I went to some networking, joined some other training, and learned about multi-lets, which then led me to HMOs, which, well, you've seen me speak, so you know that I'm not the biggest fan of HMOs because, yeah, I don't like the work that larger ones entail and the headache. So I wish I just stuck with the mini-mos that I initially started with. but those are all lessons learned. And we just ramped up then from HMOs. We just did some minimo conversions. Then we did back to brick 3 beds to 5 and 6 bed HMOs. Then we bought a pub that we turned into a 14-unit HMO, bought a block of flats with offices down at the bottom that we turned into some studios and some flats, another multi-unit block there. And then we found West Drayton Farm, which took up the last 5 years of my life since 2018. Okay. And it's also important as part of that story to just mention that a lot of this stuff happened simultaneously and concurrently, which is a really big part of my story. So Jamie, when we moved up here, Jamie started contracting, and he generally worked away since 2006 until COVID, March 2020. Jamie worked away Monday to Friday most weeks. So for all intents and purposes, I was a single mom during the week with the 4 kids. And then whilst having that on a personal level, we were on a year-long property training course. We took on hosting a networking meeting, became speakers at networking meetings, whilst also doing the pub conversion, the block of flats, finding West Drayton Farm, raising over £1 million in private finance, which is something we need to delve into more, the lessons learned from that, as well as doing some HMOs for other landlords, as well as doing our own, and 2 rent-to-rents that we tried, and a flip, all at the same time. I mean, speak of stupid, it's like, I look at it now and my palms go all sweaty just thinking, what on earth was I thinking? But a lot of that comes back to that whole high performance thing of just wanting to be the success and wanting to get the results. And then sometimes you do it to the detriment of your own well-being and mental health.
So that is obviously a fascinating story, and much of this resonates with me and the journey that we've been on. So it's so fascinating to see it unfold from somebody else. I'm looking into kind of getting into some of the detail of it. I think one of the things I think it's probably only kind to kind of pick up on is this word gullible, because obviously that is a word that is absolutely charged with judgment and self-judgment. The reality is, you, and I would include myself in this, and probably lots of other people listen to the podcast, is that we've walked into various well-organized rooms in beautiful hotels over the years. And what we have to, I think, now older and wiser, you have to remember that these things are highly engineered environments. They are designed to take you through a process that results in an outcome for the person behind it, which is you parting way with your hard-earned money and taking on a liability which in many cases people cannot afford. And so I suppose the point, I'm going to push back on that gullible. I think I would suggest you're obviously a very smart woman. Of course you are. I would say you are just following the natural conclusions of a process which is designed to make you behave in a particular way. So I think let's
thank you, Paul. I think I'm definitely wiser now, but I mean, my husband often jokes about how naive I am about some things, and I'm just a person who wants to believe the best, and I want to believe that people have others' best interest at heart, and that people aren't just into things for themselves and for their own good, so I can be a little bit naive, which my positivity can sometimes cause me to make decisions because I just think everything's going to be all right, which is another reason why we took so much on, because my sister, who was my business partner when we took on all these massive things, we're both like, it's going to be amazing, this is going to work, this is going to be awesome, and you need that other person who can be the leveler of like, no, maybe you need to just take one thing and then the next one. And we didn't really have that, so I do need to learn those lessons. And when I am in certain rooms now, I'm a bit more like, well, what is your angle here? What is their agenda? What's your motive? You know, so I have learned. It took me a while, but
Look,
yeah.
as have many of us, Ankie, and I think as well, it's worth it. I think if you've got that highly driven, high performer kind of personality, you're also highly optimistic, and also, you know, for right or wrong, you know, you have faith in human beings, like you like human beings. If you have all of those attributes, which I happen to share with you, Ankie, it makes us willing participants, because we do think the future's bright. We do think, you know, we can pretty much do whatever we turn our hands to and all will be well. And I think in terms of your kind of, I suppose, wiser perspective on it, you know, there's that lovely expression, you know, look at the incentives. So that's a little mantra that I have for myself and for other people, is always just look at the incentives. What are the incentives that are operating in this market, and what role do you play in this market? Okay, awesome. Right. So let's start with the good times. Okay. So you quite sensibly had, as I think many of us do, like that kind of epiphany, and certainly, you know, our daughter being born was one of the major epiphanies of my life, and there's been others since, but where it's like, this isn't what we want, you know, and you know, you were talking about the rat race, a really protracted commute, you know, which I honestly now think is inhumane, but I'm not gonna get on my high horse about that. You know, and you had this kind of epiphany, decided to do life very differently. And so quite wisely, you know, you looked at property. Property through the ages has generated and protected people's wealth through all kinds of difficult situations. And it sounds like you actually got off to a fantastic start. So let's talk about that early progress through the buy-to-lets, because you smashed it. You did amazing work. Talk to us about that. So how are you funding it? How are you finding projects? How's it doing the refurbs? You know, talk us, and obviously you're a busy mom as well, and you're married and you've got faith. And I want to, towards the end of the podcast, talk about your faith, if you don't mind. So talk us through those early good times years of the buy-to-let.
So the first ones, those flats that we did in Glasgow, it was a little bit blind, to be honest, Paul. The training course I did, they basically told you the areas that were hotspots at the time. You didn't do your own research necessarily. They were like, well, go to Glasgow, go to Grimsby, go to Burnley, go to, you know, and they had like these 5 towns. So we decided, okay, we'll look at Glasgow, which was really silly, because Jamie and I were in Holland for a year before the kids started school in England. So I was doing that contract at Philips in Eindhoven. My sister was living in Redhill in Surrey, and we decided to invest in Glasgow. But I mean, we were so protected. We found such a fabulous builder. We had a great estate agent who found these deals for us, and it all just worked out. We took it in turns to go over. Once I went once a month, my sister went once a month. So one of us was there once a fortnight. But we turned around these refurbs of these 3 flats, and they were on Aberfeldy, Aberlour, and Doyle. I think it's these streets that run parallel to each other in Glasgow. And we bought these flats. We actually funded 2 of them on credit cards, which is terrible. You know, you shouldn't do that. But that's what they were telling us to do in this training course was, you get a good enough credit on a credit card, just buy the house on it, do it up, and then sell it, and you pay it back within 6 months, you know. So it was part of that wild west of the pre-crash days, wasn't it? So that's what we did. We had some of our own funds saved up, and then we bought some of them on credit card. We had a small mortgage for one of them, and then we sold them on, made fantastic profit from that, which then led us to buy a flat in Bells Hill in Glasgow, which we still own. And then we moved on to what we were told was one of the other hotspot areas, which was Grimsby, which never ended up being a hotspot area. There wasn't that much capital growth in the place. And once the market crashed, I only think that place recovered in value in about 2016 or 2017 from, you know, after 10 years after the crash nearly. But we went to Grimsby, and then we bought 2 houses in Worksop in North Nottinghamshire by that time, because that's where Jamie and I had moved to after Holland. So when the crash came, we had those 4 houses. Then market crashed, as I said. We got cold feet, which is one of my biggest regrets. We should have just bought property and rode it out, but we didn't. Lesson learned for the next crash. So then in 2014, when we went again, we just did it really between 2014 and 2017, very, very conservatively. We just did vanilla buy-to-lets. We didn't do any BRRR, like we didn't realize we were refurbing and then adding value to refinance. It just kind of happened with some of the small refurbs we did, that we added enough value to refinance out with little money in. But some of them we left money in because we were just saving dividends from Jamie's contracting company and then using that to fund deposits. And that was how we were building it up between 2014 and 2017. We were buying 3 or 4 houses a year. And it was easy. It was something I could manage around the kids. And like when you've got a template and you just rinse and repeating, you don't actually realize how easy you've got it with that method until you try something else that then takes over your life, which is what happened then in 2017. And that's why I speak about when you scale, you don't always realize that if you just kept going with what you were doing, you could have ended up in a similar or better place than what the big deals took you to or would have taken you to, but you could have saved yourself a lot of sleepless nights because the risks and the work is just so much less.
Now we're going to get to that. We are going to get to that. Let's just unpack a couple of things you said so far, though. So in terms of like your early buy-to-lets, there's some really enormous value in there, which I think is worth just making really plain for the benefit of the podcast. Is obviously you're not advocating a strategy of using credit cards to finance.
Not at all. Oh no, please, no. That's what I'm saying. Don't do it.
And I know you're not. I know you're not. So let's get that out there nice and plainly on the podcast. But also, I've had other people on the podcast who were investing around that time, and we have some personal experience here as well. It was a different age. It was a very, very different age, and it's difficult to persuade people just how different it was. The psychology at the time, and I've interviewed lots of people about this, the psychology at the time was, if we do not buy this property today, tomorrow it will be £10,000 more. We really need to do that, like as it was going into the final peak. And there were very, very highly innovative financial products which are no longer available, and it's maybe a good thing they're not longer available. But you could self-certify, you could do a same-day remortgage, and there's a lot less scrutiny about where deposits came from. So when I speak to people who have got 200, 300 properties, that's often the methodology they used. But it's worth just being really plain on the podcast that it was a different time, and there were different financial products. The market was very different. To attempt to replicate that now with the financial products that are currently available on the market would be suicide. You wouldn't make it to the end of the year, because the carrying costs and just the whole process is very different now. So I suppose a bit of a health warning on that. But
absolutely. And it was also like you rightly said, a lot of that on paper shouldn't actually work. It worked because of how the market was just growing and exploding on a weekly basis, wasn't it? So like I say, we were buying these flats for between 35 and 40k, spent 10k on a refurb, and then we sold them for 75,000 pounds, because it was such a first-time buyers market with young trendy types in Glasgow who were buying these flats, but it was how the market was. It, for so many different reasons, that kind of strategy just doesn't work, and I never ever will do any of that again.
And also, like, there's some universal truths that that many, I include myself in this, many of us have benefited from really suitable economic conditions in basically a rising market. A rising market covers up a lot of mistakes and a lot of kind of problems. And so I always say when I speak to people, when we do case studies and we show, refinancing all the money out, I always say, look, this is not about being a genius. Like the market was with us. If the market wasn't with us, it could have been a different story. Let's all be candid and honest about that. And you flag up there as well, potentially buying a property, towards the peak of the market and then having to wait a decade for it to bounce back. I mean, that is just a truth which is so rarely shared, isn't it? I mean, I have had, Jason Living, he was on the podcast and he was really candid about his experience, but, that is a universal truth. People buy towards the top of a market and it takes decades, if not 2 decades, ever to see the equity. So when you see the narrative, like there's no bad time to buy a property, I would really push back on that and say, depends what you've lived through. I mean, if you've been in the trenches through an aggressive downward cycle, and you're telling me there's no bad time to buy a property, I really question that, because to see negative equity for a prolonged period of time takes a certain character, doesn't it, to weather that storm?
No, it does. And I mean, we were really fortunate in the fact that the interest rate, the mortgage product we were on was so cheap that property cash flowed really well, and it has always cash flowed really well. So that was our saving grace in a way, because the worst thing would be if you're in negative cash flow every month and you're overall in negative equity, and you've in order to pay that property off, you'd have to put in 10 or 15K, so I'm just grateful that it did recover, and it has slowly crept up. But I think also the lesson of taking someone else's opinion or someone else's research as rote, in terms of, this training company was quite reputable, and them saying, well, these are the current hotspots. You took that then as being law, like, okay, this is a good hotspot area, and didn't really do much of our own research into what constitutes that property being a hotspot, what constitutes it being in a rising market, because that's something I would now I'd always do my own research, and I always base it on what I want and need out of that investment, not what someone else is telling me. So that's also a really big lesson learned. I mean, we benefited from it massively with the Glasgow properties, but then not with that one in Grimsby.
And then a time came, 2017, where there was a kind of a change of pace by the sounds of it. So you moved from a model which was kind of, almost like the Jim Rohn model. Jim Rohn used to say, kind of do your duty, and do your career, but quietly in the background build your fortune. Whether it's 1 hour a day, go and build it, which is what you were doing. You were taking all that surplus capital, and rather than buying all kinds of extravagant things, and you may have done that as well, you were plowing it into building this fortune that was scaling very, very nicely. And then there was this change of pace where you started looking at different kind of things. You embarked upon some by the sounds of it, some more intensive property training, and then you started doing these bigger projects. So I suppose, what was the catalyst for the change of pace? Like, what made you have an appetite to do that? And then tell us about how it went with this more aggressive approach to property investment.
Okay, so I was going to local business networking meetings, like general ones like BNI, those kinds of ones, and I would always talk to these guys about property, and sometimes their eyes just glazed over because they just didn't get me in that way. And one guy said to me, you should really go to a property networking event. So off I went to Sheffield Pin, and it was March 2017. I went there for the first time, and I actually that evening won the prize that they do in this draw. And the prize was to go down for a day's training of like quick start in property investing kind of day training in London. So I went to that in the April, and my vision with going to these events was inspiration and was to be with like-minded people, but I really wanted to learn more about momentum investing and really adding value quickly to buy to let so that we could scale up our buy to let portfolio. That is why I went to these events, was to increase my knowledge in that way. But on this day in London, Paul, I learned about having multiple streams of income from the same property, as in HMOs, shared houses. And I quickly realized that day that 2 of our buy-to-lets could very easily be converted into HMOs, into minimos, the smaller HMOs, which is something that I then did. And that was the catalyst then to us going to the bigger deals. And the reason I went on to that was very much driven by a little bit of FOMO, because of everybody who were going on the different seminars I attended and the networking meetings I went to were doing HMOs and were reporting these incredible monthly cash flow figures from one deal. So, you know, when you're like, oh, I want some of that pie. So that was kind of driven by that. And also just the fact that I was highly motivated by Jamie, who was working away every week, earning very, very good money as a software developer in SAP. But all of us wanted him to be home, because he missed out on all the sports days, the Christmas concerts, all of that kind of stuff. So I saw all this as an opportunity for us to replace Jamie's income. And that is where the big drive and the big scale came from. It was all of us working together as a family. My 2 boys were teenagers, then the 2 oldest boys. They would help me put furniture together in the minimos, hang pictures, equip kitchens, do all that kind of stuff, so that we could scale up and replace Daddy's income. And we actually had a term for it. We called it Operation Get Daddy Home. That was kind of what we called it in our little family, right? Was we wanted Daddy to be home in the week. And that is where all of this was born from. It was from that heart and that motivation of we need to replace Jamie's income. But because of the size of Jamie's income, it isn't a small one, right? So yeah, it was a big, hairy goal of what we needed to achieve. And I was motivated then and very inspired by doing those first 2 minimos and how much it added to our monthly cash flow. And in hindsight, one of my biggest regrets with scaling is not just carrying on and doing more minimos, because minimos are a lot more manageable. They're fun. The tenants know each other, or they get to know each other in a smaller 4 or 5 bed house, you know. But then I was like, oh no, the more rooms, the more cash flow. And that was when we then scaled to the bigger place and did the pub conversion that turned the pub into 4 flats with 14 rooms across the 4 flats on one site. The amount of antisocial issues you get from that many tenants on one site, in a smaller town, you know, there's so many lessons learned from scaling to that kind of place. So that was really what then led to it building up, was just wanting to get that extra income and being very motivated by the multi-let strategy, which I'm not dissing the multi-let strategy. I'm just saying I'm not the biggest fan of larger HMOs, and I would rather do a multi-let strategy with minimos or with blocks of flats.
And that all makes complete sense. And it's like, you know, it's genuinely moving, you know, hearing that sentiment of like, get Daddy home. I mean, that really, God, that is, yeah. So that's obviously like a really beautiful reason to do it. And you know, what I find it interesting, I mean, you're in the Property Mums group, and you've recently done a retreat with them. We'll talk about that as we get to the end. But I think it's worth also like signposting some of the really beautiful things. Like property still to this day is absolutely a method for men and women, whether they've got a family or not, to create genuine financial independence. And everybody should be financially independent, you know, regardless their circumstances. You know, it's something we talk about as a family, that we're all independent human beings. We choose to be together, but we're all, you know, independent, sovereign individuals, sovereign people. It is so that is such a powerful motivation. And the beauty of it, like, property can actually do it. Like, I'm not a permanent property bull, like, you know, that all the path leads to gold, but it is genuinely something that can fit around family, isn't it? I mean, you know, that we've done it for a long time here, and you know, I've learned the lessons of put my phone on silent, put it face down on the table, because I know exactly when the school, you know, when school's finishing and when someone's going to pay me a little visit and tell me about their day, and that is the best bit of my day. So I'm going to pay attention, you know.
Absolutely.
And it is a vehicle for getting to all of those school events, like being every single one, which I imagine is one of the motivations that you've had in this process.
Absolutely, it is. And all the more reason to be really careful then with what you take on in property. Because when I was doing the buy-to-lets and when I was doing the minimos, I could choose my time. I could choose when I was busy with property, and then do the school run and be fully present for the kids, to do homework, to take them to their activities, to make tea, to do bath and bedtime, you know. But when we started going on this wheel of the scale and the bigger deals, and having so many different moving parts of a refurb on a pub conversion, whilst raising finance and agreeing the exchange delayed completion on this block of flats, whilst negotiating for buying West Drayton Farm, whilst being on a property course and running an event and speaking at events, and just way too much went on, which then meant the freedom that I had created for myself, I lost because of the decisions I made by taking too much on and working 14, 16-hour days to do the admin that is associated with a deal in the afternoons and at night and 6 o'clock in the morning, because during the day I was just running from one appointment to another with different refurbs and different builders and agents and solicitors. And that was a nightmare of my own making, Paul, which is such an important lesson. And I don't ever want to go back to that again, because a lot of times people have this reason why, don't they, for why they want to embark on getting that financial independence from property, and they want to leave the day job, but then they actually just create a far bigger job for themselves in what they take on. And that is what happened with us. We went for these really big deals, and they were great deals, but we didn't need to do them all at the same time. But again, a lot of that was born out of that FOMO thing of, oh, there's never going to be a deal like this again, so we've got to go for this one. And even though it's a bit much to take on whilst we're already doing another big deal, we've got to bring that one in. And constantly I was driven by that goal of replacing Jamie's income. So my positive nature kept on going, it'll be fine. You just work hard for 2 months and then it's all sorted. And then the 2 months turned into 2 years, and etc., because you just don't realize how many delays there are, how much longer things take, how much more it costs, etc., which is the story of why scaling to bigger isn't always better. You know, I do wish in many ways I had just carried on with the buy-to-lets, because I wouldn't have had these 5 years of just pretty much a bit of a blur in my life. But then again, I wouldn't have learned the lessons I've learned. So it all happens for a reason, doesn't it?
It certainly does. And, you know, for those listening to the podcast, it's often important, if you can, to learn the lessons from others as well. Like, we don't all have to walk this path, do we? I mean, you've walked this path, so have I. I think there's a couple of like real absolute nuggets in there that it just, you know, worth highlighting. You know, you're striving to kind of release a software developer back into the wild in the shape of your husband, having worked with a handful of software developers. I think half the problem is they are so well remunerated that when they're talking about replacing the income through property, I've honestly sat back and said, honestly, I would keep with the software development for as long as you can, and just not milk the cow, but they are so well rewarded that it's actually quite difficult. You know, it is quite difficult in a realistic time frame to replace those numbers, because they are so well rewarded. But equally, you know, I always balance it with, like, never, the expression I use is never let the lights go out. You know, if you are beginning to feel genuinely unhappy, like depressed, anxious, then of course, like, now is the time to let it go. But they are so highly paid that it is a challenge for them to let go of the side of the pool, is the expression. Also, I think, you know, it's fantastic you're so honest, and that you share that you know, as many of us have done, that you started off down this road with an intention, a direction, and it sounds like you got a little bit lost on this road at this point in the story, and maybe lost touch with maybe why you started out in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. We definitely did, Paul. And I mean, we had the pub conversion on the go. We had the block of flats on the go. And we had our own pot of finance that we plowed into these two deals. We had a small amount of investor finance that had helped us with those two deals. But now this opportunity came along in the form of West Drayton Farm. And it was incredible. I went there the first time, just fell in love with it, as most people who ever visited it have done. And the property had 11 different tenants in it, if you will, at the time when I went to look at it. So from a deal due diligence perspective, it was an income generating asset, because it had these different people paying a weekly rent to live in these different units, provided they weren't very nice. They were a bit stinky and cold and drafty and old fashioned and very tiny, but with a vision of this property that could be this incredible holiday let complex. The farmhouse where the family lived would be this group house, and then all these tiny little bits that people were renting, we would convert them into combining some of them to create some apartments. And then there were all these outbuildings to create cottages out of, to do some new builds where this barn was. So it was just, you went there and you just saw potential. And I did a huge amount of research into the holiday let market in the area that was just growing. Tourism in that part of around Sherwood Forest is just growing. Lots of demand, you know, so everything on paper made so much sense with this deal. So we took the deal to different property events to raise finance. And we ended up, in total, for West Drayton Farm, we raised over £800,000 worth of finance, which helped us buy it, helped us refurb it, you know, and then another portion of finance we had raised for our other deals. And it makes me, I remember listening to one of your previous podcasts where one of your guests also said that people don't take raising finance seriously enough. And that was the thing I realized from that whole process, is it's an incredible vehicle to work with private investors to help you accomplish your goals and to buy those deals and refurbish them. But it's an enormous responsibility. And what happened for us was we had raised all this finance that was in this deal. So luckily the asset was there and the equity was there. But then COVID came, and everything that resulted from COVID came. As a result of COVID and not having the income, the first valuation was lower than it was meant to be, which meant the refinance was lower. Then the interest rate issue came after COVID, and we literally just came up against one obstacle after another. And I think it's that whole, I don't even remember what your question was now. Sorry, I've gone off on such a tangent. I just think it's that whole drive to wanting to succeed and wanting to have these great, amazing deals that you can go and present on and show, wow, look at me, I've accomplished this amazing deal. But the reality is very, very different for a lot of people. I've spoken after my talk that you've seen and my previous talk about the pain and gain of a life in property. the amount of people who have come up to me afterwards, and some of them are quite well-known investors on the circuit, who have said, yeah, this happened to me, or I'm currently living this, and it's not spoken about enough, that a lot of people take on more than they could possibly handle, or more than they can chew in a given time frame in property, and actually then it ends up killing you, because you work so hard and you don't end up getting the refinance, or you don't end up getting the valuation that you need. And in the meantime, you're responsible for all these private investors' money that gives you sleepless nights at night, because you need to repay these people.
Mm-hmm. And this is why you're on the podcast, Ankie. And this is why you're on the podcast, because I sat there listening to this presentation and I said, wow, she said it. She's actually said it. And I said to you immediately that I could get you, having you come off stage, there was certainly the best presentation I've heard this year, if ever, because of how raw and truthful and honest you are, and as you continue to be as well. And it is a message that people really need to hear. So let's delve into it. So what were those 5 years like then? So what happened?
Okay, so we found this place, like I say, on paper it was incredible. We did the due diligence on end valuations, we did the due diligence on occupancy, and everything looked amazing, and it worked. I paid for consultancy from a well-known property advisor who helped me to make sure that there was enough profit in at the end, so that it was a great deal. And we, so we embarked on this, and it looked amazing, and hence us being able to raise all this finance. And people came to our open days, people came to our discovery days, and also just fell in love with the property and saw the potential. So we went into this deal having purchased it with some bank finance, and then our investors who helped us purchase it. We had some vendor finance initially that investors then replaced the vendor finance when that expired. And we immediately set out to do the refurb on the farmhouse. That took 4 months. So we had our first group guests in the farmhouse in April 2019. And then once that went live, we then set out to convert 4 apartments from the 8 old stable bedsits. And that went live in September 2019. So that was 5 months after the farmhouse went live. So then we had these 5 units, 4 apartments and the farmhouse. So for the apartments, you generally got business travelers during the week, and then people visiting Sherwood Forest, couples or young small families visiting Sherwood Forest at the weekend and during the holidays. And then for the farmhouse was more for groups. So it was for multi-generational family gatherings, reunions. And then also we allowed hens, but it was only mature hens under very strict rules. So that was the makeup of our guests. And it was going fantastic, for a fledgling startup business in 2019. The farmhouse had been going for 10 months when COVID came. We were at the start of 2020. We set out to automate everything and to hand it over to a management agency. So because I never set out to be a holiday-let operator, I want to go on and develop more properties, So 2020, we were meant to hand everything over to a management agency and then move on to the next deal. Unfortunately, as we all know, March 2020, COVID struck. And at the beginning of March, life changed massively for me already, because my sister, who was also my business partner, had to step away from the business for personal and health reasons. So she handed her part back to me at the beginning of March. And then 23rd of March, the announcement came that everywhere was in lockdown, and we just had one cancellation after the other, had to do so many refunds, and then weren't allowed to have guests for months. When we were allowed to have key workers, we got NHS workers into the apartments. We had then moved to the farm to look after everything, because it's such a big place. It was a security issue. So we were there homeschooling with the kids, working through lockdown. And when the staycation boom, when word came that in July in the summer holidays, people would be able to go away again. We realized that we have a lovely Victorian villa is our home in Retford. We thought this would also be a fantastic group house because we needed to increase our cash flow from all the months that we'd missed out on. So we converted that one into another group house. So we had 2 group lets then, and we moved into a static caravan at West Drayton Farm so that we could have all the possible cash flow from the rentable units, you know. And that was at exactly that time then that I had what you probably know of, the mental breakdown. And it started because of burnout, because of everything. And that's why I set the scene earlier about everything that had been going on, because it's so important to know that when you are on this hamster wheel as a high performer and you just keep on going and going and going, sometimes stopping can make you actually realize that you have burnout, which is what happened with me, because we were just going from 2017, 2018, 2019. We were just going, one refurb, one refinance, one conversion, one new deal, more investors. You know, we were just going. And then 2020, when everything stopped and we had to do all these refunds, and I'm like, where on earth are we going to get the money to keep servicing our investors? We didn't have the kind of bank that would give you a payment holiday at all. They would have called the loan in if you requested one. So we had to service all this debt with no income, and all that worry, everything just stopping, just made me stop. And I ended up for about a month not even functioning. You know, my kids were homeschooling, but the older ones were basically looking after the young ones, because I ended up having to get professional help and speak to a therapist who helped me understand where a lot of that stuff came from. And some of it was unprocessed trauma from when I was younger. But it all manifested and came out in this breakdown. And it was as a result of that I learned these lessons, Paul, that are so important for high performance entrepreneurs to know, is that sometimes the reason we keep going is because of those things from our childhood, or those things from our upbringing, or wanting to be seen to perform, needing to be the best, having to have that accolade to get acceptance, whatever it is. A lot of that for high performers is born out of that, and not actually out of actual desire to do that project or to pursue a certain strategy. Because I realized then taking on the bigger multi-lets wasn't actually ever anything that I had a passion for. I have a passion for providing homes to families and for making a difference in our local area with housing that we provide. That is what I want to do. But the bigger HMOs didn't bring that. So that process during COVID, and with everything stopping, I was so grateful though for the fact that we had our buy-to-lets, we had the block of flats, we had the HMOs, because when the farm brought nothing in and very high expenditure, all of them were still bringing us an income, you know. And I know a lot of people say, oh, you should just stick to one strategy. But for me, the fact that we had multiple streams of income from different property strategies actually saved us.
And to your credit, I mean, to put you, I suppose, put you fairly and squarely in the picture of that and give you credit for this, you had built strong foundations. And I think, you know, it's one of the lessons that I took from your presentation that, you know, I'm hoping others hear, is that it's not a race. And actually, if you can invest in building, just focusing on the fundamentals and building really strong foundations, if you do have a wobbly period, as everybody does in life, it's those foundations that will come to the rescue. I mean, it's difficult to give you as much credit as you deserve for how profound the lessons that you are sharing here. And I know we're going to get onto some more explicit lessons later, but you know, you started off by talking about the fact that, you know, you've always been this high achiever, and that you said really early on in the podcast that a lot of that was that sort of almost seeking for acceptance. And you talked about, you know, the relationships that the sisters you have, and maybe some of the pressures that brought to there. And, you know, what I've heard, what resonated with me, is this craving for validation through performance. And I was away in Norway a couple of years ago, a year or two ago, and I've read this book. I'll have to put the book in the show notes. And I was in a tent under the midnight sun, and so my tent was glowing green, so I couldn't sleep. So I was listening to this audiobook, and there was this line in this audiobook, and I will put this in the show notes. I'll find the name of the book, which said, basically, it's about like the second half of your life, and it basically said, nobody is ever going to care about any of your professional achievements when you're gone. The only and you know, the only reason people love you is because of who you are, and that's it. Like all of this other stuff is just side, like it's just, and I get the very clear lesson that I get the sense that's a lesson that you've had to learn.
Absolutely. And you know that saying of write your own eulogy.
Yes. Yeah.
And say what you would want people to say about you and about how you lived your life, and then live your life that way. And that's very much become it for me. And that is why I'm so open about the fact that none of that actually matters. How I treat the people around me matters. How much of a difference I make to people's lives matter. Whether I care about people and I'm kind to people, that's the stuff that matters. And when you come from a place of love, then I think the results will follow, won't they? You know, and that's something I've had to learn the hard way. But if I hadn't got to the point of burnout and having the breakdown as a result of COVID, then I wouldn't ever probably, I would possibly now still, Paul, be going on that hamster wheel of just another deal, another result, another process, you know, and to the neglect of my kids and my home and my family. So I'm grateful that COVID happened for what I learned from it. But I don't ever want to go through it again, that's for sure. You know, it's like I was saying at church to some of my friends the other week that while all of them were putting on Facebook how bored they were, and they were learning different recipes, and they were gardening, and they were laying patios, and they were digging ponds, and they were knitting and crocheting, while people were putting on Facebook about that in their lives, Jamie and I literally didn't know whether we were going to make it. We did not know whether we would end up losing everything because of how enormous the debt was with no income coming in. And thank the Lord, Operation Get Daddy Home didn't succeed, and he still had his incredible income. Because if he had quit his job because of our property income and property business, you know, we possibly would have gone under, because he actually had to prop us up for several months when there was no income. And you're talking eye-watering hybrid bridge kind of rates that we were paying on finance, because in 2020 we were meant to develop out the rest of the site to end up on our final GDV, and we couldn't do that because of COVID, you know. So things happen the way they're meant to, don't they? But yeah, it was a very, very tricky and difficult time.
And it's obviously lovely to hear your sentiments on it now. Looking back on it, I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about the realities of it in a moment. But obviously now it's lovely to hear your perspective on it, that, you know, it was an opportunity to learn a new way. There's this lovely book by an author called Marianne Williamson. It's either kind of Return to God or Return to Love. And she says the main problem that people have in life is when is that they're just managing. And actually what people really need to do is to hit a rock bottom. Those are her words, to hit a rock bottom. And rather than get up, you should kind of pause for a moment. And because she has a strong faith, she says you should pause, remain on your knees and start praying, and use it as an opportunity to have this rebirth, which is very certainly the impression that I get from the time that we've had together. You've been through this almost like this rebirth post this.
Yeah.
So without wanting to invade your privacy, that's not what this podcast is about.
Yeah.
But I suppose for the benefit of people who may be experiencing a similar thing right now, what does it look and feel like to be burnt out? So how did you know you were burnt out?
I think I was unable to function. Like, I didn't want to get out of bed, that's very unlike me, you know. I just wanted to sleep. I couldn't even focus on helping the kids with anything, and I just felt so overwhelmed by even the tiniest things that I had to do. I couldn't cope with, and they seemed like these mountains that were in front of me. And then there were the actual mountains which were in front of me, which was this massive responsibility of a property. But I ended up making everything into these great big mountains in my head, because I was just so overwhelmed and unable to cope. And I am generally quite a high capacity person. I can handle quite a bit of stress and quite a bit on my plate, but I was just not able to cope with anything that was on my plate. And luckily, a friend had told me about this therapist who was able to do sessions over Zoom because of COVID and everything. So I started seeing her for these sessions over Zoom, and it was so useful to delve into a lot of my motivations in the past for doing things, like FOMO, like wanting to be seen, like the acceptance, the validation, you know, and delving into that from my early years and deconstructing it and unpacking it, and then realizing, okay, that is my motivation, or a certain behavior in me is actually a manifestation of something that needs to be dealt with from years ago. So it was very, very useful. And I've already said, but I'll say it again, I'm so grateful that I went through that, because I am a changed person. And my faith grew so incredibly through all of that, through just getting to know myself better and accepting myself more, you know.
And to what extent are you a perfectionist? Do you have perfectionist traits, or are you not so much of a perfectionist?
I'm not so much a perfectionist. I think I'm more of a control freak.
Okay.
In the sense that I didn't get that 80% done is better than not at all. I wanted it 100% done my way, you know. So I didn't delegate easily. I didn't hand things over easily. And I mean, I'm still struggling with that. It's a process. You don't just suddenly drop it after you've had 3 sessions of therapy, right? It's like default settings that you constantly need to work on. But I think that's my thing was like, oh no, people need to do it my way. But I wouldn't say my way was perfect in any way, shape, or form, but I wanted it to be done my way. And I've learned a lot now through the process that halfway done or 80% done is better than not done at all, because I couldn't get around to it because I caused the bottleneck in the process, right?
And there will be lots of people listening to the podcast which resonate with that you're not the only one in that shoes. And I think what a good signpost that's probably kind also to deliver at this stage is, obviously, it sounds like a talking therapy was a useful tool for you to progress out of burnout. And so would you recommend that to somebody who's feeling maybe not in the best place?
Yeah, I would. A talking therapy, psychotherapy, I mean, it takes a lot of different forms for different people, but counseling is just talk to someone, because sometimes a burden shared or a worry or a thought shared then lightens the load, doesn't it? Or someone can just point something out or give you that bit of wisdom or that bit of discernment that you just can't see yourself because you are overwhelmed, or you can't see the wood for the trees. So I would definitely advise anyone to just talk. And that is what we also encourage in the Property Mums group, you know, is just for the mums to just say, I'm overwhelmed, I can't cope with the school runs and the little ones, and having to look at all these deals or whatever the case may be, and just talk it out, because there's a lot of encouragement, inspiration, and support to come out of talking.
Awesome. Go on then. Let's get to these lessons. So you have you've learned a lot of lessons. So give us well, which of the many lessons do you want to kind of focus on and take us through?
I think the biggest one for me is the FOMO thing.
Okay.
And I think there's a lot more people who actually have FOMO but don't even realize that they have FOMO. Right. So fear of missing out is basically, for a lot of us, our decisions could be driven with the kind of deals we take on, the things we go to, the events we attend, could all be driven by FOMO, because we don't want to miss out on an opportunity. We don't want to miss out on a deal. We don't want to miss out on a conversation. We don't want to miss out on a potential contact. So a lot of people may take too much on with the deals they take on, the events they go to, the strategy they explore, because of FOMO. And that is a big lesson I learned. I realized that I had become a network host. I had become, I was part of a new training program after the mastermind I was on. And I had done all these things because of FOMO, and not because of that was actually my place where I was meant to be at that time. Equally, I took on larger HMOs out of that fear of missing out on that income and that potential cash flow and those potential deals. And also the fear of missing out on the accolade of being the person with a key picture on Facebook, you know? So I think fear of missing out is totally the wrong driver, Paul. And I've said that in so many of my talks, you know, that each of us should do some introspective work and say, why do I want to be part of this? Do I want to be part of this because this is part of my purpose, my place, and my calling? Or do I want to be part of this because I want to be seen to be there? Or because I want to be seen to do that? Because that is probably the wrong driver. So I have a new one now, which is JOMO, and it's the joy of missing out. So
oh, wow.
So yeah, I'm a lot more selective with where I go, what I take on, where I drive to speak. All of that I'm a lot more selective on now that we've sold the farm and we've kind of got this new era in front of us. I'm being very selective with what I look at and what I consider and who I talk to about that as well, you know. So yeah, I now like to think that I subscribe to JOMO instead of FOMO.
I absolutely love that, and that is certainly a path that I have gone down, and a model that I found really helpful was the teachings of John C. Maxwell. He has this lovely book, it's on the bookshelf in front of me, 15 Valuable Laws of Growth. And he has this really beautiful exercise, I think it's chapter 7, The Law of Design, about more, less, eliminate. And I've had various stages at my life where I have used that as being my lifeboat. And I have done that mental model, you know, for a long period of time and very profoundly, and been ruthless and have eliminated so much in order to, you know, refocus on the fundamentals, you know, really focus on the important things, which obviously I suspect for both of us are family, our freedom, our health, and those, you know, those absolutely cornerstones of life. I absolutely love JOMO. What was it again? Say it again.
JOMO.
Yeah. Right. Okay. That's definitely going in the show notes. And I suppose I don't want to appear to podcast listeners that I am being overly protective of you. Although I am cultivating those feelings, because I think what you're doing is you're addressing really difficult, challenging issues that aren't really discussed in public. And I suppose I don't want, you know, to be constantly appearing to be running to your side to defend you. But, you know, a lot of the narrative in the property space, like in all wealth creation spaces, you know, 7 figures this, 6 figures that. And it's really easy for ambitious, high performing, positive people to get hoovered up into that narrative, and to lose focus on the things they started off with. So I suppose saying, let's be kind to ourselves here, Ankie.
Absolutely.
Kind
And I think it's like that saying of you've got to learn the lessons and move on, haven't you, Paul? You know, I've learned a lot of painful and expensive and time-consuming lessons, and I don't want to do that again. So I want to learn the lessons. I want to move forward and move on. I don't want to dwell on the negatives of this stuff, but equally, it's really important to speak about the fact that people do take too much on, and people do scale too quickly, or people borrow too much money and then they're in a bind and they can't pay it back, or they don't get the revaluations, or whatever the case may be. And it's just important that we say that it is ultimately, it's much more of a longer term game. You're not going to achieve what you set out to achieve in a year. Generally, that is probably 0.1% of the people who go on the seminars and who go on the training courses actually do achieve that goal within a year. It's much more of a longer game, and it's just bit by bit, day by day, you know. So I just think it's really important that we talk about that.
And I think you've also signposted to another really useful model that I would urge people to explore. I'll put in the show notes, is Stephen Covey's 7 Habits. And, you know, you explicitly referenced the exercise that he talks about, which is envisage your own funeral, write your own eulogy. What do people say? And I find that a really powerful tool. And I revisit that every year. And I invite, you know, people that I work with to revisit that. Is like, why are we doing any of this? Like, what's the mission? Like, why are we, what are we striving for? Okay, so are there any other lessons? So I want to now kind of look to the future, but I also want to give you the final opportunity. Are there any other lessons that you kind of top of mind that you would really like to share? And then what we'll do is we'll talk a little bit about where we go from here, the future. I know there's been like quite a big development in relation to the project itself in the last few weeks, I think. And you took some women on a retreat, and the feedback on the retreat was absolutely phenomenal. You know, a good friend of mine went on it, and you know, she was really thrilled. I can tell you the feedback was great. So are there any final lessons you want to share?
Yes, there's just 2 others. I think a lesson that keeps coming up, and it comes up now as well with the stuff we're looking to for the future, is that no one is coming to save you.
Oh, that is one of my favorite expressions, Ankie.
That's, you know, and it's so it's sometimes when it comes to it, you've just got to do what it takes, you know. And again, at some of the networking and seminars, people would say, oh, your time is worth way too much, you need to pay someone else to do that, you need to pay someone else to do that. But sometimes, Paul, when it comes to it, you've just got to knuckle down and do it yourself. And we had that experience with the farm in COVID. We had grounds people, we had linen people, we had cleaning people. But when it came to it and there was no income, we had to cut everything down. And we became the grounds people and the linen people and the cleaning people for quite a period of time until we could employ people again when things started to recover. And some people are a bit too proud or a bit too full of themselves as property investors to think you've got to just sometimes knuckle down and do some of that stuff yourself. Equally, I didn't want to live in that static caravan anymore. So we converted 2 of the low-level barns at the farm into a cottage that we lived in. But the quotes we had from builders were just way more than we could afford. I mean, we had literally no money anyway. So myself and our 2 teenage boys and 3 of their friends converted this place, except for the specialist plumbing and electrical and joinery work. We did the rest of it, you know, and we learned. Our building control lady was amazing. She taught us what to do, and then we did it. And we insulated and put all the stud work up and everything for this property. And that again comes down to the fact that no one is going to come and say, hey, can I convert this place for you because you need somewhere to live? You need to knuckle down and do it yourself sometimes, you know. So yeah, that is a really big one for me. And my other one that's a real bugbear for me, and that I really feel like more property people should hear, is that the 5 a.m. club is not for everyone. And
Oh my God, we've been separated at birth, Ankie.
Oh, will we?
Like,
So you see, I'm an early riser.
me
I don't get
too.
up as early as 5 a.m., but I am an early riser because I like doing my devotions and my
Yeah, yeah.
study and prayer time early in the morning. However, from my experience, a lot of the people who train on and profess the 5 a.m. club are guys without families.
Yeah,
And if you have kids, the reality of getting up at 5 a.m. and having meditated and done an hour of deep work and
yeah,
an hour of exercise by 8 a.m. is absolutely ridiculous.
yeah.
By 9 o'clock, when we go to do the school run, we sometimes feel like we've worked a full day, and that has nothing to do with actual work or meditation or
Yeah,
exercise. It's because we had to get the kids out the door.
yeah.
And that's something I've spoken to some of our property moms as well, and they're like, I just can't eat the frog so early. I can't get up that early because she's been up with a baby at 2 and 3 a.m. So you've got to take it from who it comes from, you know, and you
Totally.
don't have to get up at 5 a.m. to be a success. You can get up a little bit later, or you can have a nap in the afternoon, or you can be tired and burn the midnight oil and wake up
Yeah.
later in the morning. So it's again just some people get so fixated on what they are taught when it isn't the reality or even that applicable for all of us.
But there is much I could say about the 5 a.m. club that I'm not going to say on the podcast because I try and not swear on the podcast, and I have a particular point of view about the 5 a.m. So just to offer some balance. So obviously there is a fantastic book called The Miracle Morning, lovely book.
Yes, I love the
I've
miracle morning.
taken a lot of inspiration from it. Yeah, I've built my morning routine of meditation, journaling,
Yes.
um, exercise, movement, family,
Yeah.
all of that stuff, which is the rituals which have kept me healthy and have kept me, well, one, helped me return from being burnt out many times, and have kept me from the door of burnout as well as having a non-negotiable month off every year in the summer. But that, that's like a minimum operating standard for us now. I would say out of necessity, because
Yeah.
partly my personality. I'll take responsibility for that. It's good to have a month off, recalibrate, know really where you are, because as you say, unless you have a proper break, you actually don't know where you are, if you're constantly busy. The 5 a.m. club, obviously the book The Miracle Morning is a fantastic book. Everybody should read it. I have been surrounded by groups of guys that have done it, and one of the real alpha guys, probably the most alpha guy in the group, said to me, actually, I'm just going to say what he said. He said, "You think this is all bullshit, don't you?" And I said, "Yeah, I do think it's all bullshit. I think it's ego. I think it's all bullshit. And I don't think you're doing it either." And he said, "I'll let you into a secret, Paul. We're not. Like, I get up, I take my photograph of my alarm clock, and then I go back to bed." I said,
Wow, okay.
you're not the only person doing that. Anyway, so there is that. Also, there's a fair bit of literature on it. So I've read 3 studies, I suppose out of self-justification, if I'm being honest, but I've read 3 studies. One was by a trainer of Olympic athletes, and he said there is no good reason for an athlete to wake up before 6 o'clock in the morning. It's just, there's no benefit to it.
Yeah.
And then there was another celebrity trainer who wrote an article on it, and he said most people who have stressful lives, where that 5 a.m. is a really important part of their sleep cycle, and really organically they shouldn't be active till 6. And in fact, if they wake up before 6, they should pretend to be asleep. And it's, what do you mean pretend to be asleep? Well, your body doesn't really know that much of a difference. So just don't leap out of bed. Just lie there, try and relax, and see if you fall back to sleep.
Wow.
He's not an advocate of like get up and get busy and like punish yourself. He was like, no, just see what happens. And there's another guy, Paul Check, who's written a book on it. And so I'm totally with you with that.
Yeah, it's gone, sorry.
Yeah, well, so I think it's a fantastic point, Ankie. It's well made, and obviously you come from the perspective of a mother with it, and I think that's a useful add-on there as well, because our lives are very different for different people, aren't they? And you're not the first person who has said that to me in private. Is this really doesn't work for mums, does it? Like
no, it doesn't. And your point you made about the Miracle Morning is amazing. I actually do the app every morning.
Yeah.
And do my savers, and I don't want to lose my streak. I'm on day 277 now.
Oh, good on you. I'll have to explore
for the whole year, because it really helps to just ground you with your morning routine, is to to have the meditation time and the affirmations and all of that. So it's great.
I might have to explore the app. And I yeah, deeply respect and admire the context about nobody's coming to the rescue. I tend to think about that as a bigger picture as well, in terms of, and I'm not seeking to delve into politics. That's not the purpose of this podcast. But when I hear people tell me that they think a different politician is going to change their lives, I do have a head in hands moment and think, I don't want to be overly blunt, but if you think anybody on this planet is coming to the rescue, you're deluded. You're absolutely deluded.
Absolutely.
We are the captains of our own ship. We're the author also of our own misfortune, but we're also the only person coming to the rescue. You know,
that's true. No, it really is. It really is.
And you've alluded to property mums. We're going to signpost towards the end of the podcast. But in saying that, I don't mean that we are that we have to do it on our own. You know, I completely endorse all of your comments. You know, it's about being part of a community, finding your community, finding who you resonate with, and being part of that. We are tribal creatures. So just to make absolutely plain, what neither of us are saying is you're on your own, son, get on with it.
No.
You know, it's more take responsibility and be part of the community.
Yes, absolutely. And just don't think someone's going to come and bail you out, or come with a golden ticket or something like that. You know, you've got to take the steps and make a lot of it work for yourself at the end of the day, because you know, you and your partner or significant other know what actually works in your context, don't you? You know, so we just realized we just had to get things done so that we could get through it, you know. So there was one last one I just wanted to mention, and that is, sorry, I don't know if we're okay for time, but it's that after every wedding comes a marriage. And what I mean by that is, if you imagine the deal is the wedding and the long-term management of the deal is the marriage. So many people are so excited about the wedding part and the ceremony and the reception and the cake and the dress and all of that, which is for us who love deals. It's finding, stacking, negotiating, making that deal happen. That's really exciting. But then there's a long-term impact, which is managing that HMO or managing that service accommodation or whatever that property may be that you then have running afterwards. And that was my lesson. I love converting HMOs. I think it's amazing, but I didn't want to have anything to do with the day-to-day running of them. And that's the actual marriage part, is the longer term, you know. And I think people just need to do a bit more research into a strategy or into a specific path in property. It's not just the excitement of the wedding. There's the marriage that comes afterwards that you need to take into consideration.
Definitely. And as you've already alluded, like, it's a long game. It's a long game. I think those are excellent lessons. Thank you for sharing them with us. So what's going on with the farm? I heard recently that you may have some exciting news on this front.
Yes. So we sold it, and the completion was last week. The reason for selling it was that it basically completely took over our lives, and due to the financial constraints since COVID and trying to recover income-wise, we were due to go onto a fantastic finance product last October, which was pulled after the rate crisis with last October, you know, with a mini budget about a year ago. So the product we had been promised was pulled, which meant we spent several months trying to find another lender, and the products were just way too expensive. We were going to take even longer to really get to it being a really, really good business. And in the meantime, our funds are tied up. It's taking weekends, bank holidays, evenings, and we decided to sell. We got a fantastic buyer, and we completed last week. So now
congratulations.
We are on 100% payback for all of our investors, which is incredible. We are so grateful to have been able to do that. And now we're looking ahead to what's next.
That is fabulous. Many congratulations. And what are the feelings that are invoked by this piece of news? Like, how do you feel about that?
bittersweet, Paul, because Jamie and I both poured our heart and soul and life into the farm for the last 5 years, especially for 3.5 years through COVID and surviving, so we also have a lot of family memories there, having spent COVID and lockdown there with our children, having converted that unit with our 2 teenage boys, all the homeschool, the static we lived in, like we have so many memories there. So it was bittersweet. We were very emotional and sad last week, but equally relieved and grateful that we had the opportunity. Very proud of the property that we've passed on to the new owners, and just looking forward to what's next after a well-earned rest in South Africa first.
Very good. And absolutely, like, kudos to you for going through with that, making a decision with a rational, open mind about what the best thing was for you, what the best thing was for the project. There are others less enlightened than yourself, Ankie, who would have held in there, maybe against their better judgment, just to prove a point or something, maybe. But you, as I've said already in this podcast, clearly a very, very smart woman, and no doubt a very smart choice. No doubt a very smart choice. So congratulations.
Thank you, Paul.
So tell us a little bit about the future. Like, let's gaze into the future. What's your direction of travel? What's next for you, your family, for the business?
So we're looking towards commercial opportunities, because we have a SAS that we need to deploy as well, a SAS pension. So we're looking for our own funds and through the SAS at commercial opportunities and mixed use, kind of multi-let mixed use opportunities and commercial. So that's what I'm researching and learning about at the moment and looking towards, but very, very, very slowly.
Very good. After a well-earned break as well, I should add. And so,
yes.
if you don't mind, it's clear to me, having spent some time with you, that faith is a really important cornerstone. Would you want to just talk a little bit about your faith and what that journey's been like, and what impact it's had, and where you're at with that as a human?
Okay. So I grew up in a Christian home, but quite a traditional church in South Africa. So it was very rules and regulation, very strict. So I moved away from that when I was at university and in my early years of working and being abroad. But I kind of found church again when I was in the States, and started going to a few women's conferences. And then when we moved to Workshop in North Nottinghamshire in 2007, I just had this real desire to find a church home again. And I started attending the church that I still go to now, 16 years later. And it's much more of a, what would be referred to as a charismatic church, much more free, not as strict as the church I'd grown up in. So I've just, I've gone through various mentoring sessions there with some more mature ladies who have mentored me, and I've mentored several ladies in the church, and I now run our women's ministry, and I'm just quite involved there, singing on a Sunday and things. And my faith is like, it's my anchor and my foundation, so I often have this conversation with some of my other property friends that I honestly don't think we would have survived and would have got through the story with COVID and West Drayton Farm and the breakdown and the burnout. We wouldn't have gotten through it without completely collapsing if it wasn't for our faith. And it just strengthened something in me of my walk with God, and I'm a big believer in giving and making a difference to other people's lives. So I share about the fact that it is it's my crutch, it's my glue, it holds me together, and I like writing devotionals. I have a daily devotional that I post on a Facebook group, and write lots of different inspirational things for the people in our church. So I love being involved there, and I love being able to share about it. And yeah, I think for my eulogy, it would be one day that I would just want people to say that I was a very generous person who made a difference to people's lives and ultimately pointed them in the right direction.
Very cool. Very cool. And I'm sure they will. So final couple of questions. I'm obviously going to
Okay.
signpost people to where they can find you. I suppose the final question is this: and you can take this as you wish. What is most important to you right now, or what are you optimizing for right now?
Most important to me right now is balance. It is to look at the wheel of life that life coaches often show people, and to look at all those 10 segments of the wheel of life, and to make sure that I'm in a good balance in my life between work, property, business, family, social, faith, community, and that health and fitness, and that I don't keel over in the wrong direction, because I need to watch myself with that. So it's really important to me, and just my kids, having the freedom to spend time with them, and feeling that release of the time pressures that we don't have anymore now with West Drayton Farm, is to just apply that well, Paul, rather than going in the wrong direction again. So you'll have to check in with me in a few months and see that I'm applying that.
I certainly will. And I think Wheel of Life is a really fantastic model. It's really simple, but it's really fantastic. I mean, we recently did retreat this summer, and without giving too much of the show away, we use the Wheel of Life as like a key component of it. And it's a really simple but fascinating tool to allow you to look at your life. And then as part of my inner circle group, my mentoring group, we do it every quarter. But also I do it periodically. Whenever I get to the end of a week or get to a weekend and I don't feel great, I do it on a Saturday or Sunday. I do the Wheel of Life just in my journal. Like, well, what is out of balance here? Like, what is being neglected? Is it that I need to, do I need to spend a bit more time with Liz? Do I need a bit more kind of daughter time? Or is it that I need to go and just be in nature myself and just decompress, without all the stimulation that we get?
Absolutely.
So let's definitely signpost people in that direction. And then the final signpost is, where can these so if what you've discussed today has resonated with people, and I've got absolutely no doubt that it has, where would you like me to send these lovely people to find you?
Oh, so probably the easiest place is on social media, on Facebook or LinkedIn. I'm the only Ankie Bell out there, so you can easily find me and connect with me there. I had all the business emails and everything, but we don't have the business anymore, so you'll have to watch that space for that one. So just through social media. And then any mums in property, if you want to look us up, Property Mums UK, we have a monthly free roundtable that is tomorrow night. First Thursday of every month, we have a free roundtable Zoom call connection. And then there's a lot of support in the Facebook group. And we do 2 retreats a year. And you mentioned the one we just had in September, that we had 20 women there with us, and it was amazing. So we're just there to add value to mums in property, and to encourage one another to have more balance and to be kind to ourselves.
And I know lots of people in that group, and they've all say lovely things about it. So if you're a property mum, go and seek out the other property mums. Ankie, thank you so much for everything that you've shared on the podcast today. As I say, I think it was an absolute pleasure hearing you speak live. I'm so delighted we managed to get this on now, and I really appreciate everything that you've shared with us. It's of such value, and I do honestly think it's life-changing, Ankie. I know, and I don't know if that lands with you, but I do think it's life-changing. What you've shared today may make the direction of travel for others so much more easy, because they can learn from the path that you've trodden. So thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been amazing to talk to you, Paul. Thank you.
And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That is the Property Investor podcast with Ankie Bell. I'll put all the stuff in the show notes, and you can follow it there. To discuss anything that Ankie and I have discussed, please join me at the next Property and Investor Breakfast. There'll be a link in the show notes. If you've enjoyed the podcast, which I sincerely hope you have, please give it a 5-star, give it a review, share it with a friend. And thank you very much for listening, and look forward to speaking to you again soon.